Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where winter presses against your eyelids before you even fall asleep. You can almost feel it now, the sharp bite of cold stone through thin soles, the breath in your chest turning faintly smoky as you exhale, the darkness arriving early and staying far too long. You're not crawling into a memory-foam mattress or pulling up a heated duvet. You're standing in the Middle Ages, where sleep is not a luxury ritual but a nightly negotiation with freezing air, damp walls, and whatever small mercy warmth might offer. And here's the uncomfortable truth: you probably won't survive this, not without seriously complaining to customer service, which, tragically, does not exist yet. This is a time when winter isn't something you romanticize with candles and playlists. It's an enemy that creeps into your bones. The sun sets early, the days feel shorter than they should, and the night promises very little comfort. People don't ask how well they slept. They ask whether they slept at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment with your location and local time. Somewhere out there, someone is watching this at 3 a.m., wrapped in a blanket, silently grateful for central heating. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by stepping into a medieval winter evening, the kind that feels heavier than modern cold. There's no insulation humming inside walls, no thermostat waiting for a tap. When the sun disappears, warmth goes with it, as if the day itself has taken the heat away. One mainstream historical fact sets the tone immediately. Most medieval homes were colder indoors than you'd expect, often only a few degrees warmer than the outside air during deep winter. Stone and timber might stop the wind, but they don't trap heat the way modern materials do. So when night arrives, it settles everywhere: floors, walls, bedding, and lungs. You can hear the house settle. Wood creaks. Somewhere, a draft snakes along the floor like it's alive and actively looking for your ankles. The smell of smoke lingers from the hearth, sharp and faintly bitter, clinging to clothes and hair. Fire is precious here. It's been burning all day, but it won't last the night. Fuel costs effort, and effort costs calories. So the fire will fade, embers glowing softly, leaving you to face the long hours ahead with whatever warmth you've managed to trap. Here's a quirky tidbit you might not expect. Medieval people genuinely believed cold air itself could make you sick if it entered your body while you slept. Not germs, air. Cold, damp night air was thought to creep into open mouths, pores, and even ears, unsettling the body's balance. That belief alone shapes how you approach bedtime. You're not just tired, you're defensive. Sleep feels risky, like lowering your guard in enemy territory. You shuffle closer to where you'll sleep, already thinking about how to keep heat in and danger out. Your modern brain wants to complain, politely, at first, about the lack of comfort. But medieval life doesn't respond to complaints. It responds to adaptation. People here sleep because they must, not because it feels good. Rest is functional, like eating or repairing a shoe. Comfort, if it happens, is a bonus feature. Historians still argue whether medieval people felt colder than we do today or whether their bodies adapted over time to persistent chill. Some scholars suggest constant exposure toughened them, lowering their sensitivity. Others argue that malnutrition and illness made cold more punishing, not less. As you stand there, imagining the night ahead, the debate doesn't matter much. Cold is cold. And tonight, it's everywhere. You notice how early everyone prepares for bed. There's no scrolling, no one more episode. Darkness dictates the schedule. Candles are expensive, and oil lamps are smoky. When the light fades, activity fades with it. Sleep comes in stages, not because it's trendy, but because the night is long and broken. You're already learning the first lesson of medieval sleep: it bends around the environment instead of controlling it. Your breath fogs faintly in front of you. That's not poetic flair, it's a genuine indicator of how cold the room is. You think about your modern bedroom, how even in winter it stays politely warm, like it's trying not to inconvenience you. This place has no such manners. It challenges you outright. The floor is hard, the walls are unyielding, and the night feels like it's pressing inward. There's a soft shuffle nearby, someone else settling in, sharing the same space. Privacy is a luxury few can afford. Sleeping alone, in a dedicated room, is rare outside the wealthy elite. And even then, wealth doesn't guarantee warmth. That realization hits you slowly. Money doesn't always buy comfort in this world. It buys status, space, maybe decoration, but winter doesn't care about titles. Winter treats everyone equally badly. Consider that your second light joke of the night. Medieval winter is the ultimate equal opportunity discomfort provider. You start to understand that sleep here isn't about drifting off easily. It's about preparation, strategy, and endurance. Every choice matters: where you lie, what you wear, how close you are to others. The night ahead is long, and waking up cold is guaranteed. The goal isn't luxury rest, it's making it to morning without losing too much heat, health, or hope. And just before you finally lie down, a quiet thought settles in. People did this every winter, year after year, without knowing anything else. No memory of heated floors. No dream of electric blankets. This was normal. Which is both impressive and slightly terrifying, like realizing your ancestors were tougher than you, but also maybe a little bit miserable. That's joke number 3, gently tucked under a blanket of respect. You ease yourself closer to where sleep will eventually claim you, aware now that the story of medieval winter rest is not about softness, but survival. And as the fire's glow fades further, the night truly begins, carrying you forward into the next layer of how people endured the cold, one sleepless stretch at a time. You drift forward without ceremony, the night pulling you deeper into the structure around you. What keeps the cold out is not comfort, but architecture shaped by necessity. You begin to notice the house itself, not as a backdrop, but as an active participant in how you will sleep. Medieval homes are built to endure weather, raids, time, and neglect. Warmth, unfortunately, ranks somewhere lower on the priority list. You stand inside walls that feel thick enough to last forever. That's not an illusion. A mainstream historical fact quietly asserts itself here. Medieval buildings, especially stone ones, were designed for durability and defense, not insulation. Stone absorbs cold during the day and releases it slowly at night, like a memory you wish it would forget. Timber-framed houses do slightly better, but gaps between beams, warped planks, and settling foundations let winter air creep in with impressive determination. You feel it most at floor level. Cold sinks. The ground beneath you is either packed earth, stone slabs, or wooden planks laid directly over soil. No underfloor heating. No vapor barrier. Just the steady upward sigh of cold. This is why people don't sprawl on the floor here unless absolutely necessary. You learn quickly to keep your body elevated, even slightly, away from the coldest layer of the room. The ceiling presses low in many homes, especially peasant dwellings. This is intentional. Lower ceilings mean less space to heat, fewer drafts swirling overhead. Smoke from the hearth darkens the beams over time, sealing small gaps with soot, a side effect that, oddly enough, helps reduce airflow. It smells acrid, but it works. You breathe it in, and your lungs politely object, but medieval life is full of these trade-offs. Here's a quirky tidbit that sneaks in with the smoke. Some medieval homes had no chimney at all. The fire burned in the center of the room, and smoke simply drifted upward and out through a hole in the roof or through the thatch. It's called a smoke bay, and while it technically solves the smoke problem, it turns the entire interior into a low-grade sauna of ash and irritation. On the plus side, yes, there is a plus, it discouraged insects from nesting in the rafters. Warmth and pest control, bundled together in a package no one asked for. As you move deeper into the space, you realize the house is not symmetrical or orderly. It's grown over time, added to when needed, patched when broken. Rooms are multipurpose. The place where you eat is the place where you work, socialize, and eventually sleep. Walls don't separate functions the way modern homes do. Everything overlaps, including warmth. That's intentional. Bodies generate heat. So do animals, tools, and fires. Keeping them together concentrates warmth, even if it concentrates smells and noise too. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood heat retention intuitively or whether these designs emerged purely through trial and error. Did builders know they were trapping warmth with thick walls and small windows, or did they simply copy what seemed to survive previous winters? Standing here, feeling the cold seep through stone anyway, you suspect it's a bit of both. Knowledge passed down without explanation still counts as wisdom. Windows, when they exist, are small. Very small. Glass is rare and expensive, so openings are often covered with oiled cloth, parchment, or wooden shutters. At night, those shutters close tightly. Light is sacrificed completely in exchange for blocking wind. The darkness inside becomes thick, almost physical. You can't see the corners of the room, but you can feel them radiating chill. You notice how the door fits poorly in its frame. There's a draft there, always. Someone has stuffed cloth, straw, or even old rags into the gap to slow the airflow. It's medieval weather stripping, inelegant, but effective enough. This constant improvisation defines survival here. Nothing is perfect. Everything is adjusted. The house groans as the temperature drops. Wood contracts. Stone ticks faintly. These sounds become part of the night soundtrack. You don't startle at them the way you might now. You learn the difference between harmless settling noises and something genuinely wrong. That creak is just the beam. That thud is the wind. That scratching, probably a mouse. You hope it's a mouse. Another mainstream fact quietly settles in. Medieval people spent far more time indoors during winter nights, not just sleeping, but conserving energy. The home becomes a cocoon against the season. Venturing outside after dark in winter is rare and risky. Roads are icy, visibility poor, and the cold unforgiving. So once you're inside, you stay inside. The night wraps around the house like a lid. You find yourself near others, closer than modern personal space allows. It's not rudeness, it's thermal efficiency. Heat shared is heat saved. You can feel it already, the subtle warmth of another body nearby, faint but meaningful. Architecture alone can't win against winter. It needs people to complete the system. There's a soft humor in realizing how much effort goes into simply staying marginally warm. You think about modern complaints, thermostats set 1 degree too low, socks that don't match. Here, survival is the baseline. Comfort is theoretical. That's your first gentle joke of this section, and it lands quietly, like a log settling in a fire. The house smells like everything it has ever been used for. Wood smoke, damp earth, old food, animals, human presence. It's not unpleasant once you accept it. Smell, like cold, becomes background noise. Your senses recalibrate. Historians still argue whether wealthier medieval homes were actually warmer than poorer ones in winter. Larger spaces, higher ceilings, and more windows look impressive, but they bleed heat. Smaller, humbler homes sometimes retain warmth better simply by accident. As you stand there, you begin to suspect that luxury and comfort were often at odds. That realization will matter later. You adjust where you sit or stand, instinctively choosing spots shielded from drafts, closer to shared warmth. You're learning the house, mapping it by temperature rather than layout. This is how medieval people navigate their homes in winter, not by aesthetics, but by survival zones. The cold hasn't defeated you yet, but it's patient. It presses in slowly, persistently, reminding you that sleep here will depend not just on what you lie on, but where you lie within this stubborn, enduring structure. And as you prepare to settle, the house itself seems to lean closer, ready to test whether you've chosen wisely. You ease forward into the heart of the room, drawn instinctively toward the place where warmth once lived more confidently, the hearth. Even now, long after sunset, it still glows faintly, a low red pulse in the dark like a tired eye refusing to close. This is where the day's heat was born, and where you hope some fragment of it might linger long enough to soften the night. The hearth is not a fireplace in the modern sense. It's open, often set directly into the floor, sometimes edged with stone, sometimes not. A mainstream historical fact settles in quietly. In most medieval homes, the hearth was the primary, and often only, source of heat. It cooked food, warmed bodies, dried clothes, and defined the center of domestic life. But it was never meant to burn all night. Fuel was too valuable, and unattended fires were dangerous. So as sleep approaches, the hearth weakens, shrinking from blaze to embers. You feel the unevenness of its warmth immediately. Your front warms slightly while your back remains cold, like the fire is politely refusing to commit. Heat doesn't spread evenly in these rooms. It rises, escapes through roof gaps, or gets swallowed by stone. The idea of a uniformly warm space simply doesn't exist yet. You learn to angle yourself, turning like a human rotisserie to catch whatever warmth remains. Here's a quirky tidbit that adds a strange layer of intimacy to the fire. Ashes were often raked over embers before sleep, not just to reduce fire risk, but to preserve heat until morning. In some homes, those embers would be revived at dawn rather than starting a new fire from scratch. Fire, like sleep, was segmented, never fully extinguished, never fully alive. You respect it quietly, knowing tomorrow's warmth depends on tonight's restraint. Smoke lingers. Even with a chimney, the draw is imperfect. Your eyes sting faintly, your throat dries. Medieval people accepted this as normal. In fact, there's evidence suggesting constant exposure to smoke may have toughened lungs over time, though probably not in a way modern doctors would enthusiastically endorse. You resist the urge to cough loudly. That would disturb others, and besides, everyone else is breathing the same air. Historians still argue whether medieval households deliberately slept near dying fires for warmth or whether proximity was more about habit and space. The truth feels like both. Warmth dictates behavior, and tradition cements it. You don't question why you're here. You just know this is where the heat was, and therefore where you should be. The hearth also shapes the room's layout. Benches, stools, and sleeping areas cluster nearby. The further you move away, the colder it gets, dramatically so. You can feel temperature gradients in your body, like invisible lines on a map. Step closer, and your face warms. Step back, and the cold snaps at your knees. It's less room temperature and more choose your climate. You think briefly about modern fireplaces, decorative, controlled, often switched on with a button. This one demands respect. It burns unpredictably. Sparks jump. Ash drifts. There's a reason people kept water or sand nearby, even at night. Fire is friend and threat, sometimes within the same minute. That's your first gentle joke of the section. Medieval fire is like a roommate who helps pay rent but might also burn the house down. The smell of charred wood mixes with old smoke embedded in the walls. It's comforting in a rough way, like proof that others have survived nights like this before you. Generations have sat where you sit, warmed their hands the same way, and faced the same slow surrender of heat as night deepened. As the fire dims, the room grows quieter. Crackles fade. Shadows soften. Darkness presses closer. This is the signal everyone recognizes. It's time to settle. No announcement is needed. Bodies shift, movements slow. Sleep doesn't arrive suddenly, it approaches cautiously, like something unsure whether it's welcome. Another mainstream fact slips in here. Medieval fires were rarely kept burning overnight except in extreme cold or special circumstances. The risk of fire outweighed the comfort. So most people accepted that nights would be colder than evenings. Sleep, in winter, meant enduring a drop in temperature rather than escaping it. You adjust your position again, feeling the cold claim more territory as the hearth's glow weakens. Hands are tucked in. Feet are drawn closer to bodies. The posture of sleep becomes compact, protective. Sprawling is a luxury you won't afford tonight. Historians still argue whether medieval people slept better or worse because of this environment. Some suggest exhaustion made sleep deep and unavoidable. Others point to frequent waking, cold discomfort, and smoke irritation. As you sit here, watching the last warmth fade, you suspect the truth is inconveniently mixed. Sleep happens, but it's negotiated, not guaranteed. Someone near you pokes the embers one last time, then stops. That's it. No more adjustments. The fire is done for the night. You feel a small, irrational pang of loss, like saying goodnight to something alive. And in a way, you are. The room is darker now, colder, quieter. The hearth has kept its promise as long as it could. From here on, warmth must come from elsewhere: bodies, bedding, clever tricks, and sheer stubbornness. You draw a breath, steady and shallow, and prepare to lie down fully, knowing that the fire has done its part, and now it's your turn to endure the rest of the night. You lower yourself toward where you'll actually sleep, and it becomes immediately clear that the idea of a bedroom is far more modern than you'd like. Here, sleep doesn't happen behind doors and walls designed for solitude. It happens wherever space, warmth, and necessity overlap. Beds exist, yes, but bedrooms, as private sanctuaries, are rare luxuries. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you look around: most medieval people slept in shared spaces. Families, servants, apprentices, everyone folded themselves into the same room, often the same general sleeping area. Privacy was not the expectation. Survival was. And winter made that rule even stricter. Heat mattered more than personal space, and bodies were the most reliable heaters available. You notice how the room subtly rearranges itself at night. Benches become sleeping platforms. Trunks double as footrests. The day's workspaces soften into nighttime rest zones. There's no dramatic transition, just a quiet understanding that now, everyone lies down. It feels less like retreating to sleep and more like collectively powering down. You settle near others, close enough to feel their presence without touching. That closeness is deliberate. Shared body heat raises the ambient temperature just enough to matter. It's not cozy, exactly, but it's functional. Modern you might flinch at the lack of boundaries, but medieval you understands the math. More bodies, more warmth. Simple. Effective. Here's a quirky tidbit that sneaks in with the shuffling feet. Medieval households often assigned sleeping positions based on status. The warmest spots, closest to the hearth or furthest from drafts, were reserved for heads of households or valued members. Children, servants, and apprentices were placed where space allowed, sometimes near doors or colder walls. Winter nights quietly reinforced social hierarchy, one draft at a time. You lie down carefully, aware of every creak and rustle. Sleeping here requires consideration. Sudden movements disturb others. Noise carries in the stillness. You learn to be economical with motion, tucking yourself in with deliberate slowness. This is sleep as a communal act, not a private escape. Historians still argue whether this constant closeness strengthened family bonds or simply normalized discomfort. Some suggest shared sleep created security, especially during long, dark winters. Others point out the lack of rest and personal space likely caused tension. As you settle in, feeling someone's breath nearby, the answer feels less academic and more personal. Comfort and irritation exist side by side. The floor beneath the bed, or sleeping platform, is unforgiving. Even raised beds don't float far above the cold ground, and moves beneath them, stealing warmth. This is why people pile bedding thickly, why they curl inward, why sleeping positions favor conservation over comfort. You instinctively draw your limbs closer, making yourself smaller against the cold. You realize now that sleep here isn't about drifting off alone with your thoughts. It's about synchronizing with others. Breathing slows together. Movements quiet collectively. Even waking is communal. You'll stir when others do, whether you want to or not. There's no snooze button, but there's also no isolation. A faint humor slips in as you imagine explaining this arrangement to a modern audience. Yes, you sleep with your entire household, and no, you don't get a choice. That's your first gentle joke of the section, offered softly so as not to wake anyone, imaginary or otherwise. The darkness deepens, and with it, the sense that this shared space is now sealed against the outside world. Doors are shut. Shutters closed. The night presses against the walls, but inside, bodies form a fragile pocket of warmth and breath. You feel strangely anchored by it, even if part of you longs for space. Another mainstream fact weaves in quietly. Separate bedrooms only became common centuries later, as wealth increased and architectural priorities shifted. In the Middle Ages, sleeping together wasn't unusual, it was the default. Winter simply made it non-negotiable. Someone coughs softly. Another shifts, pulling a blanket tighter. These sounds are familiar, expected. They don't break sleep so much as shape it. You learn to rest through them, letting them pass like distant weather. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced deeper sleep because of physical exhaustion or lighter sleep due to environmental disturbances. Lying here, you suspect the answer changes night by night. Tonight, the cold keeps you alert, but fatigue presses down just as firmly. As your body begins to surrender, you understand that this shared sleeping space is not a flaw of medieval life, it's a solution. Imperfect, crowded, sometimes uncomfortable, but effective enough to get through winter. And as your breathing slows to match the rhythm around you, you drift towards sleep not as an individual, but as part of a quiet, bundled cluster, waiting together for morning. You shift again, settling into what passes for bedding, and immediately understand why medieval people cared so deeply about what went beneath them. The bed, or something loosely answering to that name, is not a soft invitation. It's a barrier. A defense lying between your body and the cold, damp world below. A mainstream historical fact eases into place. Most medieval mattresses were sacks stuffed with straw, hay, reeds, or, if you were fortunate, feathers. These were laid atop wooden frames, benches, or sometimes directly on the floor. Straw was cheap and widely available, which made it the bedding of the majority. It provided insulation more than comfort, trapping pockets of air that slowed heat loss. Unfortunately, it also came with side effects. You feel them before you see them. The mattress shifts unevenly beneath your weight, crackling softly as dried plant stems compress. There's a faint earthy smell, like a barn that's trying very hard to be indoors. Straw breaks down quickly, flattening over time, so mattresses need frequent restuffing. That means tonight's bed might be better, or worse, than last week's, depending on how recently someone bothered to fix it. Here's the quirky tidbit everyone secretly expects but still grimaces at. Straw mattresses were excellent habitats for fleas, lice, and other tiny winter survivors. Warm bodies plus organic material equals party invitation. Medieval people were painfully aware of this. They shook out bedding, aired it when possible, and used herbs believed to repel insects. Whether those herbs worked or just made everything smell aggressively minty is still up for debate. You try to lie still, hoping not to disturb whatever ecosystem lives beneath you. Movement encourages biting. This leads to a strange kind of discipline, learning to sleep without thrashing. Insomnia, but make it tactical. That's your first gentle joke of the section, offered with a resigned mental shrug. Feather beds, when available, feel luxurious by comparison. They mold to the body, trap heat efficiently, and don't crunch when you move. But they're expensive. Feathers require birds, time, and labor. So feather mattresses are status symbols, often listed in wills alongside furniture and clothing. Owning one means you've made it, not comfortably, but noticeably. Historians still argue whether feather beds were actually healthier than straw ones. Some suggest they trapped moisture and encouraged mold, while others point out that they reduced exposure to cold air rising from below. As you sink slightly into the bedding, you decide that healthier might be relative. Tonight, warmer wins. The blankets come next. Wool, heavy and coarse, is pulled over you. Another mainstream fact settles in. Wool was the dominant winter textile because it retains heat even when damp. It scratches, yes, but it works. Linen sheets might exist between skin and blanket if you're lucky, adding a thin layer of comfort. If not, you make peace with the itch. The bedding smells faintly of smoke, bodies, and time. It's not unpleasant once you accept it as familiar. Cleanliness here is cyclical, not constant. Things are washed when they must be, not when they could be. Winter makes drying difficult, so bedding is cleaned less frequently. The smell becomes background noise, like the cold itself. You tuck the blanket around your shoulders, careful to block drafts. Feet are especially vulnerable. Cold feet mean a restless night. Some people sleep with hats on, or wrap spare cloth around their legs. The goal is simple: conserve heat, avoid waking. Historians still argue whether medieval people changed bedding seasonally or simply endured year-round discomfort. Evidence suggests heavier bedding was added in winter, layered rather than replaced. Layers are easier to manage, easier to repair. The medieval answer to everything seems to be add another layer and hope. Someone nearby shifts, straw rustling softly. The sound doesn't annoy you, it reassures you. You're not alone in this. Everyone is negotiating the same compromises, lying atop materials that are trying their best with limited resources. Another small joke drifts through your mind as you imagine a modern mattress store trying to sell this setup. Organic straw fill, naturally ventilated, includes complementary fleas. You suppress a smile and stay still. As your body warms the bedding, the straw slowly gives in, holding heat better. It takes time. Medieval sleep requires patience. You don't drift off immediately. You wait. You listen. You adjust once, then commit to stillness. Historians still argue whether the discomfort of medieval beds led to shorter sleep cycles or simply deeper exhaustion. Lying here, cocooned in wool and straw, you suspect people slept because they had to, not because the bed invited them. Sleep is something you fall into out of necessity, not luxury. Eventually, the cold recedes just enough to stop demanding attention. Your breathing evens out. The mattress no longer feels foreign, it feels claimed. And as the night stretches on, you realize that this imperfect bedding, alive with texture and compromise, is doing exactly what it was meant to do, keeping you warm enough to make it through till morning. You become aware of your clothing only once you stop moving. Modern sleepwear is designed for comfort, softness, and personal expression. Medieval nightwear exists for one purpose only, not freezing. What you wear to bed is not a separate category from what you wear during the day, it's simply the warmest, least damp version of whatever you own. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. Most medieval people slept in their clothes or in simple linen undergarments, adding layers in winter rather than removing them. Linen shirts, long shifts, woolen hose, and sometimes even outer garments stayed on through the night. Undressing completely made little sense when warmth was scarce and fires were fading. Sleep here is not about vulnerability, it's about preservation. You tug fabric closer around your body, feeling the stiff resistance of wool that has been worn, washed, and worn again. It's not soft. It doesn't glide over skin. But it holds heat stubbornly, like it's personally offended by the cold. Linen beneath it feels cooler at first, but it wicks moisture away, preventing that clammy chill that would wake you later. The combination isn't comfortable, exactly, but it's effective. Here's a quirky tidbit that slides in with the fabric folds. Some medieval people slept wearing belts, caps, or even gloves in winter. Head coverings were especially common. You lose heat through your head, and everyone knew it, even if they couldn't explain it scientifically. A simple wool cap could mean the difference between sleeping through the night or waking repeatedly with teeth chattering. Fashion takes the night off. Survival clocks in. You shift slightly, testing how much movement the layers allow. Not much. Sleeping here means accepting restriction. You don't sprawl. You don't stretch luxuriously. You curl, compact and contained, like you're packing yourself for storage. That's your first light joke of the section. Medieval sleep is basically human carry-on luggage. Historians still argue whether sleeping clothed led to poorer sleep quality or whether people simply adapted to it over generations. Some suggest that heavy clothing restricted circulation. Others argue that bodies adjusted, and the warmth outweighed the inconvenience. As you lie there, the layers pressing gently against you, the debate feels academic. Cold settles arguments quickly. You also notice that dampness is the enemy. Clothes worn during the day, especially in winter, might be wet from snow, rain, or sweat. Those are not what you sleep in. Damp fabric steals heat mercilessly. If there's one thing medieval people are careful about at night, it's changing into the driest layers available, even if they are stiff with age or patched beyond recognition. The smell of wool and linen surrounds you, faintly sour, faintly smoky. Clean, by medieval standards. Washing clothes in winter is labor-intensive and risky, water freezes, drying takes forever. So garments are aired near fires, brushed clean, and reused. Cleanliness is practical, not obsessive. Another mainstream fact weaves itself in: nightclothes as a distinct concept didn't become common until much later. The medieval idea of getting ready for bed is closer to rearranging layers for optimal heat retention. You don't prepare for sleep so much as fortify yourself against the night. Someone nearby mutters softly, half asleep, adjusting their own clothing. The sound blends into the low rhythm of breathing around you. Everyone is doing the same quiet calculations: where am I losing heat, where can I block it, what can I tuck in tighter? Historians still argue whether medieval people felt embarrassment sleeping clothed around others or whether modesty simply followed different rules. Evidence suggests the latter. Shared sleep normalized proximity. Layers provided coverage. Privacy, as you understand it, isn't missing, it's just defined differently. Your feet finally warm, a small victory. Cold feet can sabotage sleep faster than almost anything. You flex your toes slightly inside woolen hose, then stop. Movement invites cold air. Stillness preserves warmth. Here's your second gentle joke. Medieval bedtime advice would be: dress like you're going camping indoors. You almost smile, then remember smiling requires facial muscles, which currently feel frozen. As minutes stretch on, your body begins to accept the arrangement. The clothes stop feeling like barriers and start feeling like part of you. Heat builds slowly, held close. The cold doesn't vanish, but it retreats to the edges of awareness. Historians still argue whether this layered approach made medieval people more resilient to cold overall. Some suggest constant exposure trained the body. Others point out higher winter mortality rates as evidence of the opposite. Lying here, wrapped and waiting, you understand one thing clearly: sleep in winter is not passive. It's an active state of defense. Eventually, breathing deepens. Thoughts slow. The layers do their quiet work. You are bundled, contained, and, against expectation, warm enough. Not comfortable, not luxurious, but sufficient. And in medieval winter, sufficient is everything. As the night deepens, you become aware of another source of warmth, one that modern instincts might resist, but medieval logic embraces without hesitation. Somewhere nearby, you hear the low shuffle and soft snort of animals settling in for the night. You are not alone here, and not just among people. A mainstream historical fact settles in with surprising calm. In many medieval homes, especially rural ones, livestock were kept inside or directly beneath living spaces during winter. Cows, goats, sheep, and even pigs generated valuable heat. Their body warmth rose through floors and walls, adding a few precious degrees to the air above. In extreme cold, that difference mattered more than comfort or smell. You notice it now, the faint, earthy warmth beneath you. It's subtle, but unmistakable. A living heat source, slow and steady. The animals breathe, shift, and occasionally grunt, sounds that blend into the night like an organic furnace. You adjust your position slightly, unconsciously seeking the warmest patch. Medieval sleep teaches you to follow heat the way plants follow light. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels almost unbelievable until you remember the context. Some households slept in the same room as smaller animals, especially during harsh winters. Chickens, for example, might be kept in baskets or crates indoors to protect them from freezing. Their presence added warmth and ensured survival. Practicality trumped modern ideas of hygiene every single time. The smell is real. There's no pretending otherwise. Hay, manure, damp fur, it all lingers in the air. But noses adapt. Just as cold fades into background sensation, so do odors. Your brain learns quickly what matters and what doesn't. Warmth matters. Smell becomes negotiable. Historians still argue whether indoor livestock significantly improved survival rates in winter or whether the benefit was marginal. Some suggest the warmth was minimal. Others argue that even a slight increase in temperature could prevent illness or death. Lying here, feeling the faint rise of heat, you lean toward the latter. When conditions are harsh, margins matter. The sounds of animals are oddly soothing. There's a rhythm to them, a slow breathing, an occasional shift. It grounds you. These creatures are also enduring the winter, sharing the same shelter. You're reminded that medieval life doesn't separate humans from the natural world the way modern life does. Survival is collective, across species. Here's your first light joke of the section. Medieval sleep comes with a complimentary barn soundtrack. No white noise app required. Another mainstream fact slips in: homes built with byres, animal stalls directly attached to living spaces, were common in parts of medieval Europe. This design wasn't accidental. It reduced labor, protected valuable livestock, and conserved heat. Architecture, again, bends toward survival. You notice how the floor feels slightly warmer than expected. That's not imagination. Heat rises from below, especially if animals are housed underneath. This makes raised beds even more valuable, catching that warmth as it drifts upward. The house becomes a vertical system of heat management, with humans perched strategically above their livestock. Historians still argue whether people were bothered by the noise at night. Did animals wake them? Or did constant exposure normalize it? Evidence suggests the latter. Familiar sounds fade into sleep. Silence, not noise, becomes unsettling. In that way, a snorting cow might be more comforting than an empty room. You feel strangely reassured by the presence. Life continues around you even as you sleep. The animals don't judge, don't intrude, don't demand. They just exist, radiating warmth and persistence. In winter, that's enough. A second gentle joke drifts through your mind. Modern pet owners let cats sleep on their beds for warmth and comfort. Medieval people just scaled that up dramatically. You suppress a chuckle, keeping your breathing slow. The shared shelter also means shared vulnerability. If animals fall ill, it affects everyone. If predators approach, humans and livestock respond together. Winter compresses life inward, tightening these relationships. Sleep happens within that web. As the night stretches on, the warmth from below becomes part of your sense of safety. It's not strong, but it's steady. Combined with bodies, bedding, and clothing, it helps hold the line against the cold. Historians still argue whether this closeness blurred emotional boundaries between humans and animals. Some suggest it fostered familiarity and respect. Others argue it was purely functional. Lying here, half asleep, you suspect both are true. Survival doesn't leave much room for sentimentality, but it doesn't forbid it either. Your breathing slows further. The animals settle fully, their movements fewer and farther apart. The house feels alive, inhabited, resisting the cold together. And as sleep finally takes hold more firmly, you drift knowing that warmth tonight comes not from technology, but from proximity, human and animal alike, sharing the long winter darkness until morning. You stir just enough to notice something enclosing you, not touching your skin but shaping the air around your body. Heavy fabric hangs knee-high, thick and unmoving, forming a quiet perimeter between you and the rest of the room. These are bed curtains, and in winter, they matter far more than decoration ever could. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into the darkness. From the later Middle Ages onward, many beds, especially those belonging to wealthier households, were surrounded by curtains or hangings. These weren't about privacy in the modern sense. They were about heat. Thick wool, linen, or even tapestry created a small microclimate, trapping body warmth and blocking drafts that slipped freely through the room. You feel the difference immediately. Inside this fabric boundary, the air is warmer, heavier, slightly stale. Outside it, the cold prowls unchecked. The curtain doesn't eliminate winter, but it slows it down, like a polite but firm barrier telling the night it's not entirely welcome. Here's a quirky tidbit that whispers its way in. Bed curtains were sometimes so effective at trapping heat that people worried about bad air building up inside. Medieval medicine revolved around the idea of humors and corrupted air, and too much warmth without circulation was thought to cause illness. So you're caught in a familiar human dilemma. Do you want to be warmer, or healthier? Most nights, warmth wins. The fabric smells faintly of dust, wool, and old smoke. It's comforting in a muted way, like the smell of a coat that's seen many winters. The curtains absorb sound too. Breathing from others becomes muffled. The occasional animal noise softens. You feel slightly removed from the larger room, as if you've stepped into a pocket of night carved just for you. Historians still argue whether bed curtains were common among ordinary medieval people or mostly limited to the upper classes. Evidence suggests simpler versions existed across social levels, curtains hung from beams, blankets draped strategically, anything that could slow airflow. Luxury beds just refined the idea with better materials and more structure. The principle was universal: stop the wind, keep the heat. You adjust the curtain slightly, careful not to create gaps. A small opening lets in a blade of cold air that immediately makes itself known. You close it again, learning quickly how precise this balance is. Complete enclosure feels suffocating. Too much openness invites misery. Medieval sleep, once again, is a negotiation. Here's your first gentle joke of the section. This is essentially a medieval blanket fort, but instead of childhood joy, the prize is not freezing. Another mainstream fact slips in: canopied beds weren't just symbols of wealth, they were practical tools. Elevated frames kept sleepers away from cold floors, while curtains turned the bed into the warmest place in the room. In winter, this made the bed a destination, not just furniture. Once you were inside, you stayed there as long as possible. You notice how still the air is now. Breath lingers. Warmth builds slowly, then holds. Your body relaxes a fraction more, muscles unclenching as the cold retreats to the edges of awareness. Sleep deepens here, not because it's comfortable, but because it's protected. Historians still argue whether the lack of ventilation inside curtained beds contributed to illness. Some link them to respiratory issues, others dismiss the concern as overblown. From your current position, the debate feels distant. The cold outside the curtain feels far more immediately dangerous than hypothetical bad air. Someone nearby shifts, but you barely hear it. The curtain dulls the sound, creating a sense of isolation within togetherness. You're still part of the room, part of the household, but wrapped in your own small sphere. For medieval people, this might be the closest thing to privacy winter allows. You imagine how this setup changes the experience of waking. Morning light won't reach you immediately. Sounds will filter in slowly. The curtain delays the return of the world, letting you linger in warmth a little longer. In winter, that delay is precious. Here's your second light joke. Hitting snooze is easier when the snooze button is literally a curtain keeping the cold out. The fabric also serves as a barrier against insects, at least partially. Fleas are persistent, but curtains slow their movement. Herbs might be tucked into seams for extra protection. Whether that works is debatable, but belief itself brings comfort, and belief is a powerful insulator. Historians still argue how often these curtains were cleaned. Washing heavy fabric in winter is impractical, so they are aired, brushed, and reused. Cleanliness yields to function. Warmth, once again, outranks everything else. As time passes, the air inside the curtain grows warmer, your body fully contributing now. You're no longer fighting the cold so actively. It's still there, yes, but muted, dulled, kept at a respectful distance. Your breathing slows. Thoughts stretch out, becoming less sharp, more fluid. The curtain becomes part of your mental landscape, not just your physical one. It feels safe, contained, predictable, and as sleep pulls you deeper, you realize something quietly profound. Medieval winter sleep isn't about escaping the cold entirely. It's about creating small islands of survivable warmth within an unforgiving environment. The bed curtain is one such island, fabric, faith, and function working together to get you through the night. The warmth you've managed to gather now feels fragile, like it could vanish if you move the wrong way. And that awareness follows you as your thoughts drift toward a different kind of sleeping place, one built not for comfort, but for power. Stone castles loom into your half-sleeping mind, their walls thick, their ceilings high, their presence imposing. You might assume the wealthy slept better here. Winter quickly corrects that assumption. A mainstream historical fact settles in with a quiet chill. Medieval castles were often colder than peasant homes in winter. Their massive stone walls absorbed cold relentlessly, and their vast interior spaces were nearly impossible to heat. Fires burned in grand hearths, yes, but heat rose uselessly toward ceilings far above, leaving sleepers shivering below. Status brought grandeur, not warmth. You imagine lying in one of these chambers now. The bed might be larger, the linens finer, the curtains heavier, but the room itself is cavernous. Cold air pools in corners. Drafts slither through arrow slits and imperfect stonework. The wind doesn't knock politely, it invades. The silence is deeper too, heavier, broken only by the occasional groan of the building itself. Here's a quirky tidbit that sneaks in like a draft under a door. Some medieval nobles preferred to sleep in smaller, less impressive rooms during winter. Grand chambers were for show, not survival. Servants would prepare more compact spaces, easier to heat, often tucked deep within the castle's core. Prestige stepped aside when frost demanded respect. You feel a strange satisfaction in this realization. The cold does not care about rank. It treats lords and labours with equal indifference. That's your first gentle joke of the section. Medieval winter is the great social equalizer, and it does not accept bribes. Historians still argue whether nobles actually suffered more in winter due to these architectural choices or whether their access to better bedding and fuel balanced the scales. The truth likely shifts with the weather. On mild nights, luxury helps. On brutal ones, stone is stone, and it remembers the cold far too well. Even with tapestries lining the walls, added specifically to reduce drafts and retain heat, the chill persists. Those hangings help, but they are not magic. You feel the air moving behind them, cold sneaking through like it's exploring. Tapestries tell stories, but they also serve as medieval insulation, a dual purpose no one complains about. You imagine the soundscape of a castle at night. It's not the cozy hush of a small house. It echoes. Footsteps carry. Whispers travel farther than intended. Sleep here is lighter, more alert. The building itself seems awake, breathing cold stone breath around you. Another mainstream fact slips in: castles were built for defense first. Comfort was secondary at best. Narrow windows kept enemies out but let cold in. Thick walls stopped arrows but stored winter. Fireplaces were added later, adapted awkwardly into spaces never meant for them. Winter exposes these compromises brutally. Historians still argue whether medieval nobles adapted psychologically to this discomfort or whether they simply endured it as the cost of power. As you lie there imagining the cold pressing against stone, you suspect endurance played a large role. Power doesn't insulate against physics. Here's your second light joke. Imagine paying a fortune for a castle only to discover your servant's cottage is warmer in January. Despite all this, sleep still happens. Nobles bundle themselves in furs, layers thicker and softer than what common folk can afford. Animal pelts lying beds. Hot bricks, something you'll encounter soon, are used more frequently here. Resources soften the edges of discomfort, even if they can't erase it. The contrast between spaces becomes clear. Smaller homes trap warmth through closeness. Castles fight cold with material and mass. Both strategies have limits. Winter pushes back either way. As your thoughts slow again, you recognize something quietly humbling. Medieval sleep is shaped more by architecture than intention. Where you live determines how you rest. Stone dictates posture. Ceiling height dictates heat. Walls decide how deeply winter can reach you. Historians still argue whether improvements in heating technology changed sleep patterns before architectural changes did. Some suggest behavior adapted first. More layers, closer sleeping, while buildings lagged behind. Others argue innovation followed necessity. Either way, lying here in imagined stone cold, you feel the truth settle in your bones. The castle fades back into the darkness of your thoughts. Its cold lingers as a reminder: comfort in winter was never guaranteed, no matter your status. As your own little pocket of warmth holds steady, you return to it gratefully, knowing that medieval sleep, whether in hut or hall, is always a fragile truce with the cold. The warmth you've managed to gather now feels fragile, like it could vanish if you move the wrong way. And that awareness follows you as your thoughts drift toward a different kind of sleeping place, one built not for comfort, but for power. Stone castles loom into your half-sleeping mind, their walls thick, their ceilings high, their presence imposing. You might assume the wealthy slept better here. Winter quickly corrects that assumption. A mainstream historical fact settles in with a quiet chill. Medieval castles were often colder than peasant homes in winter. Their massive stone walls absorbed cold relentlessly, and their vast interior spaces were nearly impossible to heat. Fires burned in grand hearths, yes, but heat rose uselessly toward ceilings far above, leaving sleepers shivering below. Status brought grandeur, not warmth. You imagine lying in one of these chambers now. The bed might be larger, the linens finer, the curtains heavier, but the room itself is cavernous. Cold air pools in corners. Drafts slither through arrow slits and imperfect stonework. The wind doesn't knock politely, it invades. The silence is deeper too, heavier, broken only by the occasional groan of the building itself. Here's a quirky tidbit that sneaks in like a draft under a door. Some medieval nobles preferred to sleep in smaller, less impressive rooms during winter. Grand chambers were for show, not survival. Servants would prepare more compact spaces, easier to heat, often tucked deep within the castle's core. Prestige stepped aside when frost demanded respect. You feel a strange satisfaction in this realization. The cold does not care about rank. It treats lords and labours with equal indifference. That's your first gentle joke of the section. Medieval winter is the great social equalizer, and it does not accept bribes. Historians still argue whether nobles actually suffered more in winter due to these architectural choices or whether their access to better bedding and fuel balanced the scales. The truth likely shifts with the weather. On mild nights, luxury helps. On brutal ones, stone is stone, and it remembers the cold far too well. Even with tapestries lining the walls, added specifically to reduce drafts and retain heat, the chill persists. Those hangings help, but they are not magic. You feel the air moving behind them, cold sneaking through like it's exploring. Tapestries tell stories, but they also serve as medieval insulation, a dual purpose no one complains about. You imagine the soundscape of a castle at night. It's not the cozy hush of a small house. It echoes. Footsteps carry. Whispers travel farther than intended. Sleep here is lighter, more alert. The building itself seems awake, breathing cold stone breath around you. Another mainstream fact slips in: castles were built for defense first. Comfort was secondary at best. Narrow windows kept enemies out but let cold in. Thick walls stopped arrows but stored winter. Fireplaces were added later, adapted awkwardly into spaces never meant for them. Winter exposes these compromises brutally. Historians still argue whether medieval nobles adapted psychologically to this discomfort or whether they simply endured it as the cost of power. As you lie there imagining the cold pressing against stone, you suspect endurance played a large role. Power doesn't insulate against physics. Here's your second light joke. Imagine paying a fortune for a castle only to discover your servant's cottage is warmer in January. Despite all this, sleep still happens. Nobles bundle themselves in furs, layers thicker and softer than what common folk can afford. Animal pelts line beds. Hot bricks, something you'll encounter soon, are used more frequently here. Resources soften the edges of discomfort, even if they can't erase it. The contrast between spaces becomes clear. Smaller homes trap warmth through closeness. Castles fight cold with material and mass. Both strategies have limits. Winter pushes back either way. As your thoughts slow again, you recognize something quietly humbling. Medieval sleep is shaped more by architecture than intention. Where you live determines how you rest. Stone dictates posture. Ceiling height dictates heat. Walls decide how deeply winter can reach you. Historians still argue whether improvements in heating technology changed sleep patterns before architectural changes did. Some suggest behavior adapted first, more layers, closer sleeping, while buildings lagged behind. Others argue innovation followed necessity. Either way, lying here in imagined stone cold, you feel the truth settle in your bones. The castle fades back into the darkness of your thoughts. Its cold lingers as a reminder. Comfort in winter was never guaranteed, no matter your status. As your own little pocket of warmth holds steady, you return to it gratefully, knowing that medieval sleep, whether in hut or hall, is always a fragile truce with the cold. The hours drift on and the night deepens. You notice how the cold outside shifts, sharp gusts through gaps in the walls, soft whistling under the eaves. But inside, everything you've arranged, clothing, bedding, body proximity, bed curtains, embers, and sometimes animals, is holding together a delicate balance. The warmth isn't perfect, but it is enough. Enough to keep you asleep, enough to keep you breathing quietly, enough to survive until morning. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Medieval windows were typically small, often single-glazed or simply open with shutters. Glass, if present, was expensive and rare. The result is that cold sneaks in unpredictably, especially through night drafts. Houses and castles alike struggled to maintain steady indoor temperatures. Winter was an environment that demanded adaptation, not denial. Sleep was contingent on these adaptations. You notice how subtle movements now, curling an arm, shifting a foot, have amplified consequences. Move too far from the shared warmth, and you feel the cold instantly. Stay too close, and someone else is disturbed. This negotiation is unconscious but constant. You settle into micro-adjustments, tiny postural experiments aimed at retaining heat without causing a stir. Medieval sleep is physics in action, a continuous balancing act. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households use straw or reed mats along walls to prevent heat from escaping through stone surfaces. Others hung tapestries or thick fabrics directly over doors. Medieval interior design was often an engineering solution in disguise. Beauty was secondary, survival was primary. You smile at the mental image of a tapestry doing double duty as insulation and artwork. That's your first light joke of the section. Historians still argue whether such adaptations significantly improved comfort or if their effect was marginal. Some experimental archaeology suggests that even minimal interventions, placing a thick blanket against a drafty wall, could make nights measurably more tolerable. Others insist that humans simply endured as best they could. As you lie here, testing the air with a toe, you understand that even small victories are meaningful. You become aware of smell now, more consciously. Smoke from embers, wool, linen, animals, and humans mingles into a thick, organic scent. To modern noses it might be unpleasant, but here it is part of the sensory palette of survival. The scent itself communicates warmth and life, a quiet reassurance that the household is functioning as a living system. You inhale slowly, letting it anchor you. Another mainstream fact: medieval people sometimes placed herbs, lavender, or dried flowers among bedding to freshen the air and repel insects. Their efficacy is debated, but the practice shows that people sought comfort wherever they could. It's not just survival, it's ingenuity and ritual mixed. Sleep is as much cultural as it is physiological. Historians still argue whether these practices were widely used across social classes or largely confined to wealthier households. Evidence suggests both. Adaptations occurred on a continuum, shaped by resource availability, local climate, and household priorities. As you adjust slightly under your covers, you feel the layers of thought, tradition, and practical trial that made this sleep possible. The night has reached its deepest quiet. Breathing is synchronized across the room, and even minor noises have faded into background rhythm. Every creak, every snuffle, every whisper of draft contributes to a sensory lullaby. You feel the cold outside, but it is distant now, softened by preparation, proximity, and adaptation. Here's your second gentle joke. Medieval white noise came gratis with a combination of snoring, embers, and barnyard life. No app required. You imagine someone selling medieval soundscapes today, sleep like it's 1350. And chuckle softly, careful not to disturb anyone. Historians still argue whether this combination of environmental management and social coordination resulted in deeper sleep cycles than previously believed. Modern assumptions about comfort and rest may not align with the realities of medieval endurance, but that's precisely the point. Sleep then was a collective, active, and highly negotiated experience, a silent collaboration between human bodies, materials, and the elements themselves. You shift slightly again, small adjustments reinforcing warmth without disturbance. Your body feels the faint ebb and flow of the night, the slow cooling of the room, the occasional puff of draft, the warmth from bodies and bedding circulating quietly. Sleep deepens, steady and persistent, as the household and its resources maintain the fragile ecosystem necessary for survival. You drift further, teetering between wakefulness and sleep, when a new awareness settles in, the rhythm of nighttime tasks. Even in the dead of winter, medieval life doesn't pause entirely. Someone moves quietly to stoke the embers or tend to an animal. These subtle activities ripple through the shared space, reminders that the night is not still, that survival never fully sleeps. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. In many households, a night watch existed, even informally. In smaller homes, it might be a single family member ensuring the fire didn't die and animals remained safe. In castles, servants took turns tending embers, water, or even checking that windows and doors were secure. Winter nights were long and harsh, so vigilance had to coexist with rest. Sleep was punctuated by practical duties. You hear the faint shuffle of someone moving, the soft scrape of a foot against wooden floor, the careful lifting of a blanket. The sound doesn't startle, it's expected. Your body, adapted to this environment, hardly registers it. You sense the flow of activity without opening your eyes, like part of the nocturnal choreography. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households used night cords, thin ropes or chains, to raise or lower heated bricks from the hearth into beds without leaving the fire unattended. This allowed warmth to reach the sleeping bodies directly, combining engineering and creativity in a simple domestic ritual. You imagine the careful tugging and placement of glowing bricks, a medieval nighttime Rube Goldberg device. Historians still argue whether these tools were widespread or experimental innovations limited to wealthier households. Archaeological evidence is sparse, but written accounts hint at inventive strategies to survive the long winter nights. The ingenuity of adaptation is almost palpable here, reflected in every soft movement you hear. The room is a low murmur of coordinated survival, breaths, shifts, the faint scent of smoke, wool, and straw mingling into an intimate olfactory map. You notice how every element of the environment, the body heat, the layered clothing, the curtained beds, the animals, the embers, contributes to the orchestra of winter survival. Sleep is an ecosystem, not an individual act. Another mainstream fact: candles and rushlights were sometimes used to extend light for brief nighttime tasks, but they also introduced risk, wax dripping, fire spreading, or soot clouding the air. The compromise was constant vigilance balanced against comfort and warmth. Nighttime required negotiation, prioritizing survival while avoiding danger. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal interventions, moving embers, adjusting bedding, tending animals, significantly improved sleep quality or merely prevented calamity. In practice, they probably did a bit of both. As you lie in your own bundle of clothing and blankets, it's clear that sleep in winter is never absolute. It's a fragile, negotiated state that accommodates necessity. Your body feels warmth ebb and flow in pulses as others stir, reposition, and settle. You mirror some of these movements subconsciously, micro-adjustments that preserve shared comfort. Medieval sleep is a dance of collaboration. The night itself dictates tempo, and human bodies adapt accordingly. Here's your gentle joke: medieval white noise didn't come from apps or machines, it came from the living, breathing, shuffling warmth around you. Comfort is communal, even if slightly awkward. Sleep deepens, a slow surrender shaped by temperature, company, and the faint glow of embers. You feel the ebb of the house, the shift of animals, the murmur of humans, all contributing to a delicate equilibrium. Winter outside remains relentless, but inside, you exist within a managed ecosystem, a temporary sanctuary orchestrated through instinct, adaptation, and centuries of human trial. Historians still argue whether such nightly adjustments were consciously understood or entirely instinctual. The evidence points to both. People responded practically, but patterns repeated across households suggest shared cultural knowledge. Winter sleep is both learned and inherited, a strategy encoded into human life. Finally, as the night stretches toward its coldest point, the warmth you've gathered feels more permanent. You drift further, entwined in a network of body heat, bedding, animal warmth, and structural strategies. You understand now that medieval winter sleep is not passive, it's active, collaborative, adaptive, and, against all odds, survivable. You awaken briefly, or perhaps just stir, sensing a subtle shift in the room. Night is slowly tipping toward dawn, though outside it's still dark. You notice the faint change in air, colder patches creeping in where the fire has waned and embers have lost their peak glow. It's a quiet reminder that medieval sleep was never truly uninterrupted. Temperature dictated attention as much as necessity. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. Pre-industrial winter mornings were slow to brighten. Without artificial heating, heat retention from the night's layers was precious, and waking early was often accompanied by shivering. People rose in stages, layered clothing already in place to prevent shock from the sudden cold. Sleep transitions were gradual, influenced as much by temperature as by any internal clock. You shift beneath your blankets, careful not to lose the last patches of warmth. Even small movements expose skin to cold drafts. You tuck limbs closer to your torso, arms curled like anchors. This is winter sleep, the body's microcalculation of preservation. The world outside is not gentle, inside, adaptation reigns. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval people sometimes slept with small hot bricks, freshly heated in the hearth, placed in strategic locations like feet or under a folded blanket. Some called them bed warmers. Handling them required care, because direct contact could burn, but indirect placement extended warmth through the cold hours. It's simple engineering paired with survival instinct. You can almost feel the gentle radiance of one tucked carefully against your toes. Historians still argue how common these practices were across Europe. Some accounts suggest that only wealthier households could consistently afford heated bricks or stones, while poorer families relied solely on laid bedding, clothing, and proximity to other bodies. Yet the principle remains universal: seek heat wherever possible, and never underestimate its subtle, sustaining power. The air carries the faint scent of damp straw, wool, and smoke, and you realize it's comforting in its own odd way. It signals life continuing, resilience in the face of cold, and quiet persistence. Humans, animals, and hearths form a shared network of warmth, sustaining each other until the day asserts itself. Another mainstream fact: in some regions, medieval sleepers would rise in the night to perform chores, even in deep winter. Water had to be fetched before frost hardened it, animals checked, fires stoked. Sleep was segmented by necessity, and these awakenings were accepted as routine. The body adapted. Sleep was flexible, dynamic, and punctuated by survival. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal duties disrupted sleep to the point of reducing overall health or whether they simply became part of a resilient circadian rhythm. Either way, the medieval night was never passive, it demanded engagement. You notice how shared warmth extends subtly from body to body. Even without direct contact, the heat from a companion or an animal creates a buffer against cold air infiltrating your microclimate. You shift slightly, preserving this invisible balance, understanding that survival depends on awareness as much as blankets. Here's your gentle joke. Medieval alarm clocks were free range, either the cold slapped you awake or a bleating goat nudged you into consciousness. Reliability varied, but the method was consistent. Historians still argue whether early morning cold influenced societal patterns, work schedules, and even social hierarchies. It's likely it did. Those who could control fire, shelter, and proximity had a marked advantage, both at night and at dawn. You feel a small, almost imperceptible admiration for those who mastered these routines. As the room gradually brightens with pre-dawn light, you sense a slow recalibration of the body and environment. Sleep remains, but awareness creeps back, subtle and measured. Medieval winter sleep is revealed in these transitions: survival, adaptation, ingenuity, and patience. The night has shaped you, the cold has taught you, and warmth, precious, shared warmth, has carried you to this liminal hour between night and day. You lie quietly as the first hints of morning light filter through small gaps in shutters or drifts of snow on the window. The chill is sharper now, but the household has started to awaken. Movement rustles through the room, quiet yet persistent, as people begin to stretch, shift, and prepare for the day ahead. The rituals of winter mornings blend seamlessly with the remnants of night. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Medieval mornings often began slowly in winter, with layers kept on until the fire or sun had done enough work to make full undressing possible. Hearths were rekindled, embers coaxed back to life, and small chores, feeding animals, bringing in firewood, or fetching water, were carried out before breakfast. Sleep ended not abruptly, but with a series of gentle nudges dictated by warmth, necessity, and light. You stretch carefully under your covers, feeling the residual warmth of the night's layers, appreciating the slow negotiation between comfort and survival. Every movement is measured, too sudden, and the cold bites. You draw your knees up, roll slightly onto one side, then pause. Medieval sleep teaches patience and precision. Even in waking, the body negotiates with the environment. Here's a quirky tidbit. In wealthier households, bed warmers were sometimes reused from the previous night, carefully reheated in the hearth. In other homes, the warming process involved restoking fires or bundling warm ashes. Ingenious and slightly messy, these methods demonstrate the ingenuity required to survive winter mornings. That's your first gentle joke of the section. Medieval snooze buttons were fire, straw, and ingenuity. Historians still argue whether the slow morning rise was a cultural choice or a practical necessity. Some suggest people preferred segmented mornings for prayer, reflection, or domestic tasks. Others insist it was purely an adaptation to environmental conditions. Perhaps it was both. Lying here, you feel the careful choreography of winter wakefulness, a dance learned over generations. The room carries the combined sense of warmth, humans, animals, and smoke, familiar and grounding. Even as the chill presses against walls and windows, the ecosystem of heat created overnight holds a last vestige of its power. The comfort of shared survival lingers like a gentle hum. Another mainstream fact: morning routines often included layering clothing gradually, rather than removing night garments. Socks or hose were pulled on over damp feet, caps adjusted, and bedding strategically folded to retain warmth for later use. Survival dictated slow, methodical preparation. Speed was secondary to preservation. Historians still argue whether these morning routines influenced medieval sleep schedules long-term. Did segmented sleep and gradual rising impact health, productivity, or social patterns? Likely yes, but much is left to interpretation. You feel that rhythm now, the lingering influence of nocturnal strategies on the waking day. You hear the soft stirrings of others around you, stretching and whispering, sometimes laughing softly. Movement becomes coordination, beds adjusted, blankets folded, embers stirred. Medieval sleep, even at dawn, is communal. Survival is still a collaborative effort, one not yet ended by the approach of sunlight. Here's your second light joke. Medieval coffee alarms didn't exist, but embers, frost, and neighbors did a surprisingly effective job. You can imagine someone grumbling at the cold draft while sipping slightly too hot water from a tin cup. The sun is faintly beginning to touch the room's surfaces, casting muted light on walls, textiles, and the subtle smoke haze. You realize that sleep, warmth, and wakefulness are interwoven. Medieval winter mornings extend the lessons of the night: patience, careful movement, awareness, and respect for the environment. Every adjustment matters, from a tucked blanket to a shifted stone. Finally, as the day prepares to take over, you feel the culmination of the night's strategies: shared warmth, layered clothing, animals, curtains, embers, and careful micro-adjustments all collaborated to deliver survival. The cold outside has been resisted, not eliminated, and you rise into the faint light, aware of how hard-earned every degree of warmth truly was. The morning light grows gradually, brushing walls, floors, and the faces of sleepers with muted gold. The air is still crisp, but the household now hums with life. Whispered greetings, careful movements, and soft laughter echo through the space. The cold outside remains unrelenting, but inside, warmth lingers as the legacy of night's careful orchestration. You stretch, feeling residual heat from layers, bedding, and the bodies around you. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Winter mornings in medieval Europe were slow, practical affairs. Even in wealthy homes, firewood had to be fetched, water carried, and animals fed before full comfort could be claimed. People rose gradually, often keeping night clothing until fires or sunlight provided enough relief. Sleep transitions were extended, and the body adapted to repeated cycles of cold and warmth. You notice how each household member engages in a quiet choreography, adjusting bedding, folding blankets, and repositioning garments. You take part, almost unconsciously, measuring heat and proximity. Survival is still communal. Even in waking, you remain part of the ecosystem built during the night. The slow morning rhythm honors the lessons of winter sleep, calculation, endurance, and attention to subtle changes in temperature. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, morning rituals included reusing bed warmers, hot bricks, or coals to warm the bedding for the next night or to heat small spaces before departure. Practicality dominated over luxury, and ingenuity was celebrated. Your mind drifts to the gentle glow of a brick warming your toes, comfort delivered through human creativity rather than convenience. That's your first light joke of the section. Medieval spa days were basically hot bricks and patience. Historians still argue whether gradual morning routines influence social structures, work schedules, or domestic hierarchy. Some suggest these patterns established a shared rhythm for communities, while others believe they were purely survival-driven. You sense both truths interwoven in the slow, deliberate movements around you. The room carries a complex aroma: smoke, wool, straw, and lingering human warmth. To modern senses it might seem pungent, but here it signals life, activity, and stability. You inhale the faint traces, grounding yourself in the continuity of household survival. Sleep may have ended, but its strategies persist through warmth, movement, and careful layering. Another mainstream fact: medieval people frequently relied on communal sleep spaces to conserve heat. Shared beds, adjoining rooms, and close quarters all contributed to a microclimate that softened the extreme cold. Even as you rise, the network of heat remains perceptible, sustaining the household through the transition today. Historians still argue whether these strategies promoted health or simply delayed the inevitable effects of harsh winters. Evidence points to both. Adaptation improved survival, but risks remained. You sense that in every micro-adjustment made overnight, humans learned resilience, patience, and subtle coordination. Here's your second gentle joke. Medieval heating systems were slightly unpredictable, sometimes warm, sometimes smoky, but always a collective effort. You imagine someone sipping lukewarm water while judging their luck with the embers. The sun brightens gradually, touching fabric, walls, and faces, softening the sharp edges of night. You feel the culmination of a long nocturnal effort: shared warmth, layered clothing, bed curtains, animals, embers, and careful micro-adjustments all contributed to survival. The cold outside remains, relentless and impartial, but inside, life carries forward with deliberate calm. Sleep, warmth, and survival are interwoven. You rise with an awareness of the night's orchestration, strategies honed over generations, tested by frost, trial, and necessity. Medieval winter sleep was never passive, it was active, adaptive, and communal. Its lessons linger in the quiet spaces between breath and movement, in the warmth that persists, and in the human ingenuity that turns night into survivable sanctuary. The night recedes completely now, leaving behind a gentle hush, punctuated only by the soft stirrings of early morning. You notice the subtle warmth still clinging to the corners of the room, remnants of layered bedding, animals, embers, and shared human presence. The chill outside persists, but inside, the household breathes slowly, comfortably, held together by the quiet lessons of endurance. Every small detail, the arrangement of blankets, the careful placement of bricks, the proximity of others, speaks to an intimate understanding of winter's demands. Your mind drifts, settling into the realization that medieval sleep was not merely a pause from life, but a complex, interactive system. It required attention, adaptation, and collaboration. Each movement, each micro-adjustment, was a deliberate act of survival. You feel the rhythm of the night lingering in your own body, a gentle pulse of patience and awareness that stretches back centuries. Even as the day begins, the memory of that shared warmth holds a soft, reassuring presence. Imagine the quiet glow of embers fading slowly, the murmur of animals and humans alike winding down into a peaceful stillness. The air, though cold, feels layered and alive, carrying the scent of straw, wool, and faint smoke. Each inhalation is grounding. Even as your thoughts slow, you are comforted by the invisible network of warmth and care that allowed life to persist through harsh winters. You realize that sleep in this world was as much cultural as it was physical, learned across generations and adapted to countless circumstances. It was a gentle negotiation with nature, an ongoing conversation between cold and warmth, danger and security, community and solitude. In these rhythms, there is a quiet elegance, a reassurance that survival is possible even under the harshest conditions. Now, let your own breathing slow, matching the tempo of centuries-old nights. Let your awareness drift over fabric, embers, and shared warmth, softened by the wisdom of human adaptation. The frost outside becomes distant, a whisper you can observe without fear. Here, within this mental space, you are cocooned, enveloped in the slow, deliberate, enduring calm that medieval people mastered long before modern comfort existed. Allow your muscles to release tension, your mind to drift, and your thoughts to settle. Night's lessons are subtle but lasting: patience, attention, collaboration, and resilience. Even as the day approaches, carry the sense of quiet warmth and safety with you. The cold can wait a little longer, for now, rest and ease envelop you gently, like a carefully tucked blanket or a lingering ember's glow.